was 1979. Leonard Arrington and I had just published a one-volume history of the church entitled The Mormon Experience, a history of the Latter-day Saints. Non-alcoholic. The story behind the story is that this work was intended primarily for the non-Mormon audience. To reach that audience, we had to have a national publisher. Alfred Knopf or any other publisher of the same stature would not, we realized, allow us to publish a propaganda tract for the church. To communicate with a general reading audience, we had to use terminology that would be understood, meaning that we had to avoid in-house terms and expressions that may be appropriate for our manuals and other books written for church members. To pass muster with our publisher, we could not write history that would be too triumphalist or celebratory. We knew we were walking a narrow line. Some church members may not have liked our book. On the other hand, we were quite surprised, but of course pleased, to find out that our book even led to some conversions, or more exactly, provoked the interest and openness that allowed a conversion to occur. I will never forget how jubilant we felt one day when we received the report from our publisher that the Mormon Experience had been ordered by 600 libraries. During that euphoric time, Leonard and I attended autograph parties, and we were interviewed, and we gave quite a few talks. In one interview, we were asked to describe the relationship between faith and history. Here is Leonard Arrington's answer. I have never felt any conflict between maintaining my faith and writing historical truth. If one sticks to historical truth, that shouldn't damage his faith in any way. The Lord doesn't require us to believe anything that's untrue. My long interest in Mormon history, I've been working on it for 33 years, has only served to build my testimony of the gospel, and I find the same thing happening to other Latter-day Saint historians as well. My own answer went like this. What's potentially damaging or challenging to faith depends entirely, I think, on one's expectations, and not necessarily history. Any kind of experience can be shattering to faith if the expectation is such that one is not prepared for the experience. A person can be converted to the church in a distant part of the globe and have great pictures of Salt Lake City, with the temple looming large in the center of the city. Here we have our home teaching in nice little blocks, and we all go to church on Sunday, they believe. It won't take very many hours or days before the reality of experiencing Salt Lake City can be devastating to a person with those expectations. The problem is not the religion, the problem is the incongruity between the expectation and the reality. History is similar. I'm still quoting myself. One moves into the land of history, so to speak, and finds shattering incongruities which can be devastating to faith. But the problem is with the expectation, not with the history. One of the jobs of the historians and educators in the church who teach people growing up in the church and people coming into the church is to try to see to it that the expectations are realistic. The Lord does not expect us to believe lies. We believe in being honest and true, as well as chaste and benevolent. My experience, like Leonard's, has not been one of having my faith destroyed. I think my faith has changed and deepened and become richer and more consistent with the complexities of human experience. Expectation. We must have realistic expectations. That is true at many points in life, in choosing a profession, in entering a marriage, in joining an athletic team, in moving to a new location. Think not when ye gather to Zion. That song is no longer in our hymnal, but it served a purpose for many, many years, that everything would be perfect. It was the idea of the hymn. And that was good advice for the immigrants leaving Europe to join the saints in the West. and it is good counsel for students of our LDS history. Think not when ye study church history, we might sing, that everyone was always smiling, that the women were always dressed in freshly laundered, starched pinafores, that the men spoke softly, grammatically, and always politely, or that the children were well-mannered angels. Think not. In other words, get real. I suppose this is a message to those church members who have such tender eyes and ears that the real history of real people comes as shock and awe. Oh no, they whine, this can't be true. Or attacking a historian, quick to judge, they accuse him or her of lacking spirituality or coveting the praise of the world. My message in many such cases is, please don't speak until you know what you are talking about. Or if that sentence is too long, try this: grow up. Now don't stop the presses and say that this is my only message today. I also have some free advice for those writing critical history. To enlarge our scope and recognize the universality of the challenge, let me say a few words about an American history book that you may have heard about. It has sold over 1 million copies. It's entitled A People's History of the United States. The author is Howard Zinn, Z-I-N-N. If you wonder why young people have no historical heroes, read Zinn. If we wonder why those on the left hate America so much, read Zinn. His people's history is a long indictment of America, government, politics, and leaders. Here is a short critique of Zinn written by a fellow Marxist who at least was honest enough to recognize bad history. Like most propagandists, Michael Kazin writes, Zinn measures individuals according to his own rigid standard of how they should have thought and acted. Thus he depicts John Brown as an unblemished martyr, but sees Lincoln as nothing more than a cautious politician. To make sense of a nation's entire history, this review continues, an author has to explain the weight and meaning of worldviews that are not his own, and that as an engaged citizen he does not favor. Zinn has no taste for this disagreeable task. Zinn is an evangelist of little imagination, for whom history is one long chain of stark moral dualities. That's a description of Howard Zinn, who's not writing about Mormon history, but I can assure you that it is a pretty good description of some of the histories written by those who can find not one good thing to report in all of Mormon history. Let me tell you about a thought experiment. It goes approximately like this. I've just tried this out. I approach an episode of church history or skim it over so I know the approximate contours. I then ask myself 3 questions. First, what is the minimum I must find here if it is to be consistent with the truth of the Restoration? Very often the answer is blank, because that large issue is simply unaffected. Second, what from the point of view of a believing Latter-day Saint is the worst thing I could find? Here I let my mind run free. I pull all the stops. For example, in my imagination, Joseph Smith plans out ahead of time just what he wanted his family to think. So he goes into the woods. He waits a certain interval of time, then pretending and acting, he rushes home and acts like he had seen a vision. This is my imagination. I hope I've made that clear. This is a thought experiment. Or, as a second example, there were meetings in the Kirtland Temple just prior to its dedication. And this little exercise takes 30 seconds or so. Someone came in with a plentiful supply of hard liquor. Everyone there had a drink, and then another, and then another. Soon they were feeling no pain. Some started singing in nonsense syllables. Others, unable to walk a straight line, said things like, "I can top that, I can see angels swooping around the room," and so on. You get the idea. In other words, I am seeing this whole scene as a ridiculous drunken spree. This is a version of the worst case scenario approach.